Welcome to Sober Dad Crew, the podcast where we talk about all things sobriety, recovery, parenting, music, tattoos, work, and more. For more information, please visit soberdadcrew.com. My guest this episode is Jeffrey Everett. He's a sober dad and an award-winning designer, illustrator, and author. We talk about the definition of fame, parenting, the kinds of mistakes it is okay to make and the ones you never should, and what it's like being the heavily tattooed folks at work. All right. Can you just, tell us a little about yourself?
My kids will occasionally be like, "You're famous, Dad." And I'm like, designers are not famous to anybody else except for maybe other designers. My name is Jeffrey Everett. I run a design studio outside of DC called Rockets Are Red. I primarily work with punk rockers and pro wrestlers. I am also an art director at the National Institutes of Health. So I've also worked on small things like COVID and Ebola and the microbiome and things like that.
All the small medical stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, COVID and Ebola.
Yeah. I mean, all the really easy to figure out stuff that has no public impact whatsoever.
Yeah. Go big or go home.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I'm the guy in the room covered in tattoos, having to figure out what literal Nobel Prize winners are trying to say after 35 minutes.
And maybe stay awake. Nothing against the Nobel Prize winners. Sometimes the really smart people can be hard to follow.
It is fascinating to me because they're really, really, really smart on these one topics, and they will talk forever about them, akin to like somebody who is really into punk rock and will talk about an obscure band from Toronto for 30 minutes.
Or they'll just talk about their 7-inch single for 30 minutes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I know way too much about the microbiome, the same way as I know too much about the Chungking Can Suck It 7-inch. So, yeah, this is my life.
That and a cup of coffee is going to get you a cup of coffee, I think.
Yeah. I actually, I don't drink coffee. It doesn't have enough caffeine in it.
Well, what do you drink that has enough caffeine?
So for all the people who like to support the sober companies, it's a yerba mate tea, I think it is, called Clean Cause, and it has like 160 milligrams of caffeine, which is still lower than like a Red Bull or a Monster or a Celsius, but more than coffee and soda. And I drink like one of those in the morning. I take my ADHD meds, and I'm like good for the day.
And healthier than like Red Bull, for sure.
There is no taste of medicine or chemical in it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, whenever I'm around someone drinking a Red Bull, there's just that chemical fruity smell.
Yeah.
It's really hard to hang with. My oldest, who's not like a big caffeine guy, but like on a road trip will get those. I'm like, oh God, can we like find you a matcha? Because this is just killing me. Because he's not a coffee guy. I'm like also the tattooed guy at work. I work in an architecture firm. I'm the marketing guy, but it is interesting to sort of be like the kind of outlier thing. And it took me a while to like kind of be comfortable doing that. And did you always just kind of roll with it? I mean, maybe because you're an artist, people are like, oh, he's the artist, or
it goes two ways. Like when I work with like, I'll just say like professional people, at NIH, I think they have look at the weird artist person they must know what they're doing. But with that, there's also like I'm almost 50 and sometimes I get spoken to like I'm 24, like right out of college, and
Yeah.
that is kind of hard to deal with. I've definitely have had to give my, what's the term, like my bona fides,
Yeah.
uh, a few times and be like, no, 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 no. I know that I literally have my cat tattooed on my hand, but like I have a master's degree, I have a book out, I've won a bunch of awards, and I've literally had to take awards off the shelf and show people so they take me seriously. Um,
To like bring them in a suitcase to meetings, just like
oh yeah, and
put
like
them on the fucking table. Be like, I've set my spot up now.
they're heavy, they're like a brick. Um, but then like I'll talk to like punk rockers, and I am the square person in the room who doesn't have two shots and a beer, and I don't have like my face isn't tattooed, and so therefore I'm like the weird one. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like I always don't feel comfortable in whatever room I'm in because I don't quite know how people will take me until I start talking.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
get that. You know, the other thing, you don't look like you're almost 50, probably because you don't drink.
Yeah,
And the vanity side of the world,
weird.
as you age and you don't drink and don't smoke and don't do all those things, and you look at the people who do, I mean, Facebook, the great equalizer of the mean kids from high school, you're like,
Yeah.
man, you look terrible. You look like Golem. Like you should like can't drink that way anymore. You can't really do those things. And then you're like, all right, I'm in my 50s, but I'm doing okay.
I like to think in general I'm doing okay. Um, I was listening to one of your podcasts, and you all brought up Alex Jones really quickly, and I saw a picture of him the other day, and I was like, he's like a year older than me, and he legitimately looks 10 to 15 years over. Like, he looks terrible, and like some dapper people such as yourself can have some gray hair and you still have that youthful spark to you. He just looked one step away from the grave, and I was like, all right, I'm doing okay, I'm doing all right.
And we could hope that that's the direction he's going. Um, not,
Yes.
I just, I can't help myself.
I
I got in
we
trouble on Instagram because I put up my support of our Democratic candidates who are not without their problems. And man, those are the most comments I've ever gotten on an Instagram post ever.
Yeah, it so like I have not been shy about my work with Fauci. I have not been shy. Like I live right outside of DC. The whole like QAnon stuff, blew up at a venue that I do work with. All of that stuff. And I have had to like just learn to like turn people off and just like not care. And like at a certain point it's like, you want everybody to like be a part of a community. I sell posters, I sell a book, I sell, my skills. But at a certain point, you're just like, God, I just don't want to like have to work with certain people or like have those people think that, we're both cool with each other, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And I've had people just make terrible comments to me and then try to buy posters. And I'm just like, no, we're good. You can have your $30 back.
Yeah. I don't need it.
Yeah, I don't need to. I don't need to like. I don't need that $30 enough to sell out my morals or eat the fact that you insulted me. But you really want that poster, so I have to somehow be nice to you. Ugh.
All right, I'm gonna pivot um, a little bit and back
Sure.
to sort of dad stuff. So, how many kids do you have?
I have two. I have a senior and I have a freshman in high school. And it is absolutely terrifying.
Which part or all the parts?
All of the parts. All of the parts. I try to, I feel like my job is to make sure that they can take care of themselves when I'm dead.
Getting ready
And
to launch is what
yeah.
we call it. Because I have a 21-year-old, so he did the thing, left the house, pit in my stomach, out there working, doing his thing. But I have a 17-year-old senior too. And she's super focused. She wants to be a nurse, but it's that last bit of like, okay, like these are the skills in the world that you will need. And we're trying to help you get those last ones because you're going.
Yeah. Now, did you kind of know what you wanted to do in life when you were leaving high school and going into college?
I did in high school, I was like the music guy. I played a ton of music. I played into college. I kind of thought I was going to teach, and then I didn't do that. And I thought I'd go to grad school. I didn't do that. Like I've kind of meandered around. I sort of fell into marketing because I'm a
Mm-hmm.
writer, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I sort of like to joke that marketing is where like writers go to make a living, sort of like being a bit of a commercial artist. And so I've kind of done these marketing tracks. A lot was in nonprofits. And at a certain point, there's your resume.
Yeah.
And, is it my dream? It's not really my dream, but I find, satisfaction other places. My dad likes to joke, I'm outside of Ithaca. Like he looked at my resume once. He's like, have you worked everywhere in Ithaca? Like, I had intersects in the music biz with a nonprofit theater in town, and that was great, but the hours were terrible. Like my 21-year-old, I guess he was like 4, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I was never home in the evening. So like the notion of sort of the dream job, it made the next kind of thing that was 9 to 5 feel pretty appealing. So
Yeah.
I kind of meandered, I like to say no do-overs. There's things I think in a way I would have liked, like being a librarian or whatever, but I'm like happy where I am. I work in a great place with like cool people, and I don't take a lot of work home, and I'm respected there, and I worked hard for that respect. So like
Right.
I'm pretty like professionally fulfilled. I think it took a while for me to separate the notion of your professional career should totally adhere to this one authentic self,
Mm-hmm.
instead of sort of like we have multiple authentic selves, like I like to say still punk rock. I mean, I'm 53. How can I really still be punk rock? I like drive a Mazda SUV, it does have a Bose sound system, which is really nice. But like, I'm like, but to me, it's also like an outlook and a DIY sort of spirit to things.
Mm-hmm.
But, career wise, I think I have sort of meandered. I don't think that's even necessarily like bad.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that's being in a place that's small. Like Ithaca's a small city, and it's sort of, Cornell's the biggest employer. And if you don't work there, you're at a smaller place.
Mm-hmm.
And when you work at small places, often the way to advance is to move to another place. Like they're
Right.
small, they're kind of, you have the job you have. And if you want a different job, you got to jump.
Yeah.
Um, what about you?
Well, I mean, I kind of asked the question because, like, for me, like when I went to college, I kind of knew what I wanted to do. At least I knew like the field of creativity and art. I feel really proud of myself that my goal was I wanted to be a working creative person. And I was able to figure out how to do that. And I feel like my boys right now, their problem is like they don't have like a particular burning passion for any one thing. And they're both smart, they're both athletic, they're both, kind and empathetic kids who I genuinely like hanging out with. And they both are just like, I have no clue what I want to do. And for them, like, they are freaked out because, you know, my youngest, who's a freshman, it's like, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to do when you grow up? And there's such like a comparison competition culture, especially for young boys, that they're just freaked out. And like myself and their mother, we are successful in our fields while also having tattoos and all of that. And so like when they look around at other parents, they're just like, wait, how the hell are you able to do what you do while also doing this? You know what I mean? And so I'm like trying to help them right now, and they're just like they. I mean, I think they have a lot of brim and bluster, but like they're terrified of like the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and I think it's a couple of things too. And because my oldest, he works in the trades now. He did an overseas semester and loved the overseas part, didn't love the
Mm-hmm.
school part. He's like, how do I just get paid to travel? I'm like, I don't know, because if there was a magic equation for that, a lot of people would do it. But I think also college is so expensive. Like when you and I went to college, like I think I got out with maybe 10 grand of debt or something,
Mm-hmm.
like my, I work with younger staff who are telling me they have 70 or 80K of debt from college. I'm like, how the fuck, like, how do you even begin to manage that? So the days of just going and being like, I like history, I'll just study history and I'll take philosophy, those days feel like they're gone. And I think that's sort of too
Yeah.
bad. And I think also there is some impact of those COVID years. I think there was some developmental stuff that when teenagers who were supposed to just be out there and like launching and not hanging out with their parents, couldn't. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that those sort of impacts are sort of unfolding a little bit still. I don't think we've seen all of them, even though, we're sort of outside of this notion of COVID as a pandemic. It's just more like years get sick. But those years were pretty weird when we were all just home.
Oh yeah. And I mean, just speaking about COVID, like I like working at NIH and like kind of being backstage for everything. Like NIH initially was going to only shut down for 6 weeks. And it was this America will come together to make sure that we can battle this. Because it was not about COVID won't exist in 6 weeks. It's we're going to make it so that the hospitals can deal with this by not having so many people flooding the emergency rooms. And so we were like, yeah, 6 weeks, and we can come back. Like, things will settle down. And,
It was
6 weeks
not
went
6 weeks.
by. Yeah, and it was like, best I guess I got to go onto campus and get all my stuff because we're going to be here for another 6 months. Oh, 6 months. Now we're going to be there for another year. I mean, I still work at home, because my office on NIH campus is in like the world's largest research hospital. And so they don't want people in there who don't need to be in there because you can infect people getting treatment for like a variety of diseases and ailments. And so they're like, yeah, if you're not here, that's one less person clogging the lines. And it's like I fully like appreciate like the devastation of COVID. I think a lot more than um I still meet people who are just like, oh, it was no big deal. I just worry because I feel like because this is a conversation about not drinking and being sober. Like I never drank, and for me, like that was a way to basically, it was an act of rebellion, but also like a way to survive. Because I knew myself so well, and because of that, like I've always had to be very like goal oriented or like future focused. And I guess I feel good because like my kids have grown up to be rather protected and haven't had to deal with those things. You know, like I've made it so like my kids don't have to worry about having school debt because I had really bad school debt. And I remember I paid everything off. I paid everything off. Navians sent me a check because I overpaid. And then, like 3 months later, I got a notice saying I owed them more money. And, like, I had to, like, bring them, it was like a 2.5 hour long argument on the phone,
Like,
arguing with them
remember the
about,
refund.
yeah. Oh, I was like, you gave me refund and all that. And so, like, my kids, for them are like, I don't want to go to school and have it be a waste of money. Like that's kind of how they look at it.
Yeah.
But they're also terrified of just, you know, they're 17 and they're having existential crises. That's how you say that. Of like, I don't want to be in an office all day. I'm going to be miserable. You know, we talk about like trade. I don't want my knees to hurt like Uncle Victor, who does contracting work. And there there's just so much for like younger people to have to deal with that every once in a while, like I have to step back and go, yeah, man, like you guys have a lot on your brains and on your consciousness. So I feel bad for them.
Yeah, I think it is more complicated. Did you always want to be a dad? Was that like a thing you always thought about?
Um, I never actually really thought about it until I got married. I mean, obviously before we got married, we, you know, my wife was like, we should have kids. And I was like, okay. But it was I don't feel like having kids is ever real until you actually hold one in your hand. And then you're like, oh, this is
Who
different.
said this was a good idea? Like I just remember like sleeping with the light on
Yeah.
and like, oh my fucking god, like this little human is totally my responsibility. And I knew I had always wanted to be a dad, and I had babysat and I'd done all these things. But when you're like, oh right, this is like,
Yeah. I mean, and for me, like having the kid, I just remember looking at my oldest and just having this, I just want to make sure you're okay. And I read this book called The Expectant Father, which is like one of the few books I'll recommend to anybody. I read that book and then I read Cormac McCarthy's The Road. And I feel like both of those are like good prep for if you want to be a dad. Um, but like the expectant father, one of the things that stuck out to me was like if you ever get angry, put the kid down and walk out of the room. And it was one of those passages that just made me go, yeah, Like being a parent, you're going to get angry at your kid. It's not always just, sunflowers and moonbeams and all that. And that's when it felt real. Just you love this creature so much, but you're still going to get angry at them, even though they're just babies. And I remember like having nights of just no sleep. And I was lucky enough that I was working at a design firm that let me take off paternity leave.
Oh yeah, that's like a thing now. It wasn't a thing back then.
Yeah, and I had to argue for it, but they relented. And like I just remember having that feeling of like I want to be there for my kids, and I don't want to make the mistakes that had happened to like me and to my dad and to like and his dad and da, 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 da. I kind of wanted to cut off that generational trauma of certain things. And it really, took, when you talk about like, did you want to be a father? It was like, I wanted to be a good father. And I think that's what scared me was like, I wanted to make sure I was a good father. And I think a lot of people like, I feel like you talk about like the manosphere and like the Andrew Tates and all that, and they talk about like, or Elon Musk, like we should, everyone should be having kids, and men are, need to have 12 kids, and we need to repopulate, and da 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 da. And I'm always just like, it's really great that you have 12 kids, Elon, but
With
like,
like 12 people, he's a fucking creep. I'm sorry. Like,
oh, he's a total. I mean, when you have 12 kids, but none of the kids want to talk to you, like, are you really doing that good of a job? Or like you have Andrew Tate who talks about like, you need to dominate women and have all these kids. And I'm like, yeah, anybody can have kids. I mean, that's literally, the plot point of the movie Idiocracy. All the idiots are having kids. And it's like very easy to have kids. That's what's so scary. Anybody can have, children if they're so motivated, putting caveats on that, of course. But
yeah.
like, you know, but I think like being a good father, that was the pressure that I felt.
Yeah. And because I'm also a step parent. And so, and I was long, long ago a foster parent. And I figured
Hmm.
out at some point the name dad is earned.
Hmm.
It is not a title that is given. It is a
Yeah.
title that is earned through your actions. And I believe that to be true, and I hold that as a standard for myself that you earn that title
Yeah.
um, through your actions. But I want to go back a little bit. So you've never had a drink.
I had a sip of peppermint schnapps when I was 15, and that was a mistake.
I yeah I think I've tasted that back in the day. That just the very name says mistake.
Yeah.
And then you were just done. So you just were like, nah, this isn't for me.
Um, it was a little bit more than that. Like I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Massachusetts, and
I grew up in Maine. So
oh,
yeah,
where in Maine?
I grew up in Falmouth.
Where
So
is that? I
that is
feel like
a suburb of Portland.
okay. I know Portland. I feel like I've been to where you were born and grew up. I probably had lobster rolls or something there. Um, I grew up in Sterling, Massachusetts, which is where Mary Had a Little Lamb was written, and that's about the only claim to fame.
Is
Uh,
that like what part is that Western? Like where in Massachusetts is
it's
that?
like right in the middle. It's like 30 minutes west of Worcester.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I remember watching Twin Peaks growing up, and Twin Peaks was supposed to be this like little small town, and I was like, "You guys have a diner? Like we don't have a diner. You know, we had one pizza place downtown. We had a pizza place, and we had like a deli, like a deli in a convenience store, and we all got excited because another restaurant was going to open there, and it turned out to be another pizza place. And I was like, "Why?
Flooding the
Why are you?
market.
Yeah, come on, man." Um, but like growing up, like my school's mascot, my high school had 5 towns that all went to it because like all the towns are really small. And our school mascot was the Mountaineer, and he carried a shotgun and moonshine, and like that, kind of represented the culture where I grew up. And if you're 6'1", 180 in high school, and you don't play sports because you're drawing all day, you do not have a happy high school life.
Yeah, how
And
was prom?
uh, I got dumped by Colleen 3 days before my senior prom. And so I went to see KMFDM play in Boston instead. And I wore my tux and my little top hat. So
You probably have more fun doing that.
definitely had more fun. Um, but for me, like not drinking in high school was kind of like the ultimate rebellion. It was like the ultimate way to like piss off everybody. For me, like I got into straight edge and all that almost by accident, where I was very determined like not to drink or smoke or to do drugs because everybody I hated in my life did those things. And I had a mentality of like, well, the quarterback for our football team, he does all those things, and I don't like him. So if I don't do those things, it's just more of a distance for them. And I also knew that I would probably really enjoy doing all those things at a very young age. I was like, I understand why people drink. If I continue to do it, I will keep doing it. And so even now, 30 something years later, all the people I knew, like who didn't drink and didn't do drugs and have all the huge straight edge tattoos, every single one of them, except for maybe two, now are no longer straight edge. And I have never kind of used that as you know, a way to define myself. I just kind of happen to be that rather than, making it my personality. But like, it has been for me like a way to make sure I don't make more mistakes in my life than I already do.
No, I totally get that. Like I have that thread of not wanting to be in the mainstream
Mm-hmm.
because it's kind of like religion. I don't see like a lot of great stuff that often happens there. So, my kids when I get the but everybody's doing it, I'm like, that's the worst fucking argument to make with me. Cause that just makes my like mohawk go up, even though I don't have a mohawk now. But my inner mohawk goes up and I'm like, but I also have to like step back from that because it's like the world they're in and
Mhm.
all those sort of like pressures and mean kid stuff. And I'm like, right. Like it's also hard to choose to sort of step outside of what everybody's doing. And,
Yeah.
so then as a parent, like, how do you help empower your kid to make the right choices? I mean, we talk about a couple of things. We always talk about keeping your side of the street clean,
Mhm.
like dealing with your stuff. Other people got to keep their side stream clean, but also like making the right choice and then make the next right choice and the next right choice. Like you don't always have to get from A to Z right
Mhm.
away. You just have to keep making a move forward, figuring out what the next right move is and keep going. But it is hard, I think, to be an adolescent right now and there's stuff we didn't have to deal with. I mean, social media or whatever, potency of what the drugs that are out there is
Mhm.
terrifying. I mean, probably half the people in our high school who said they're smoking weed were probably smoking parsley. Like, who even knows? But right now, it's pretty dangerous.
And there's a lot of conflicting information. Like on one hand, I live in Maryland, and I'll go to like New York where weed is legal. I think maybe weed is legal in Maryland. I don't know. But like on a state level, weed is legal, right? But on a federal level, it's not. And so if I had to explain to my kids, like, if you smoke weed and you get busted, you may not be able to get federal scholarships for college, you know? And it makes it difficult to have to kind of work in that gray area, like, we were joking around earlier, and my kids have brought this up. It's like, on one hand, I don't smoke pot or, whatever, but like I take meds for my ADHD. I take meds for, mental health stuff. And I've had people legitimately go, well, that's not straight edge, or that's not being sober. And I'm kind of like, yeah, like, go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
Like, there's a certain amount of like, and I try to explain this to my kids, and I'm like, you have to live your life so that you're comfortable, with an understanding that, we live in a community where you can't just go around swinging your arms. So, like, one of the things that my dad taught me that I try to tell my kids is like, I don't care if you have purple hair, I don't care if you have a mustache and wear lipstick, whatever the hell you want to do, totally there for it. We'll totally support you, as long as you say please and thank you, and you make sure that you're kind and empathetic to everybody. And I feel like that's the biggest priority in my life, is for them to just kind of grow up and be like kind and nice and interesting people.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I always talked about sort of raising a male child that's like not an asshole and not, sexist and racist. And there's a lot of consent based conversations
Yeah.
with all the kids, but especially the oldest male one. And, at one point he said, I know, we've talked about this. And then I came up with like my sort of like three rules of consent,
Mm-hmm.
which are you always actively seek enthusiastic consent. You educate your friends about consent because they might not be happy. Like, we talk about every fucking thing in my family. Like, it is all on the table. Bring it. We will talk about it. But my kids have realized most families aren't like that. So you educate your friends. And number three, you have a duty to intervene,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
And
and that, he brought that up recently. We were talking about that, and he had a friendship kind of end over that topic. And I was like, and he brought it up. I was like, oh, okay. There's like, put that one on in the success chart.
yeah. And for me, I am an Eagle Scout. My oldest is an Eagle Scout. My youngest is going for his Eagle right now. And there's that weird culture clash within scouting of like, you know, why do we have girls? Why do we have gay people in scouting? And for me, talking to my kids, I'm like, scouting is teaching you that there's a bigger world out there, and hopefully teaching you that we all have a place in this world and how to take care of yourself and how to talk to people, but also like how to ask for help and how to look out for each other. And you know, I love it when I hear about like my kids holding their friends accountable and them be also being held accountable. I feel like we need so much more of that. I mean, I'm at that age where it feels like so many people are getting divorced. And all of my female friends who are going through that, the one of the biggest reasons is like I married a guy, and when I was 25, he was the toughest guy in the gym or he had the biggest car or whatever. But now I'm 50 and they don't know how to make breakfast. They don't know how to take care of their kids. They don't do anything. Like they have no interest. They don't read books, you know, like, and I tell my kids all the time, like, your goal, like, you don't stop learning when you exit college. Like, learning and being excited about the world is a never ending process. Like, you should be excited to go out there and see stuff, you know? And like, we went to go see this interactive play in New York called Sleep No More, and it was amazing. And now I'm like, we have to go back again because I don't feel like I got all of it. And like, it closes in a month, so like, we have to go see it again. And you know, the family's like, yeah, we got to go do that. So yeah, I know like I'm rambling, but on one hand, I get fearful for the future of my kids, but on the other hand, I'm like, oh man, there's so much cool stuff out there that you will get to experience, and I'm so excited for them to do that.
Right. And, and it's okay for them to struggle. And they're like, people make mistakes. Like, when I got to the point in my life where I was finally not afraid to make mistakes,
Mhm.
like, that was actually huge, right? To be like, oh, whoops, I made a mistake, whatever, at work. I apologized and I figured out what happened and I didn't do it again. Moving on, you know?
Yeah,
And that's a good workplace. But it also sort of goes to this philosophy I have is like, every day you get up and you should incrementally try and be a better dad, a better spouse, partner, better coworker. You just incrementally every day try and just be a little better,
yeah,
just a little bit better. You don't have to like run a marathon, just a little better every day at all the things. And I think
yeah,
that's been like a good philosophy for me. It's sort of like life's a journey, right? And so you just got to keep moving forward, but also the way you move forward matters.
yeah. I I feel like, you know, it the problem sometimes with how I view the world is like many layers of gray. And so like people ask me like, "Hey Jeff, like do you want to do like a political poster?" And I'm like, "Oh man, like I can't do postcard, like I can't do bumper sticker stuff because I'm always like, well, yeah, I mean, marijuana should be legal, but also like I don't smoke it. And then like, what about this and this and this? So like, yeah, I can't do a poster on pot legalization because I can't properly encapsulate everything. I mean, but I do try to tell my kids like it's okay to like fail a class. It's okay to like try something new and not be good at it. You know, for me, like the scariest thing for me is like the blank piece of paper because there's so many things that you can put on it. And my oldest, he had to write his college essay, and he was just like, I don't know what to write. Like there's so many things you can write. Every sentence can be different. How do you get to the right answer? With creativity. And yeah, like that's scary. And it's like, you know what, man, like you can write a bad paper and you're still going to get into college, right? But then there's also things like you can't fail at, like being a shitty person to your girlfriend. Like you don't want to like, fuck that one up. You don't want to do anything you'll regret,
The
you know.
karma related ones.
Yeah. The morals or ethics. I mean, it is amazing to me how much you know meanness and cruelty people will spout off casually and then kind of say, it's locker room talk or boys will be boys. And I'm like, dude, I am covered in tattoos. I have literally gone to concerts and had blood thrown on me. I've never done those things. Have I made mistakes? Sure. Have I hurt people? Of course, everybody has. But there's like some basic stuff I have never done. And I think most people haven't, you know? And like, that's the thing like, those are the things I'm trying to like teach my kids of like, be smart enough to know when you fail and it's okay versus like you failed ethically and you're going to be sitting with that for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this in like a work context and like a parenting context that it is very easy to lose a good reputation.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very, very, very hard to get it back.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I right now, I did some pro bono work for a company and they disrespected me kind of from the start. Like I sent them the work and the response was like, yeah, fix this, this, and this. And that's all they wrote. And I was just like, I think you should find somebody else. Like, again, please and thank you goes really far for me. So you can just say, thanks for sending this over. Could you change XYZ? But like, you didn't have the courtesy to do that. I'm doing you the favor here. So like, you can just piss off with that. And it's taken me legitimately like about 45 years to like start sticking up for myself.
Amen.
Uh,
I
yeah,
feel that so
yeah.
much.
And the client ended up just using my work, and I gave like no approval for it. And it went on social media. They sold out of like all of the work that they had my stuff printed on. Like they made all this money. And I ended up like writing them and I just said, listen, I was like, first off, like, I'm more angry I have to write this email than like getting ripped off. Like, because I just have kind of had to learn to let things go. But like, if I was to contact, local media and just say, hey, this company ripped me off and here are the receipts, like this company would be over because you can't work with artists full time and then rip artists off. Like that's not going to go well. And I don't think the person really understood that. And part of me just wanted to be like, no, 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 no. If you ruin your reputation, like if you get known as the person who, you know, blatantly ripped off one of your artists, like you're done for. And I'm not saying that as a threat. I'm saying it as I don't want that to happen to you over this. My kids like are almost like painfully aware because of social media how easy that is to happen. Like I am shocked. Like none of my kids have social media outside of like Discord. They don't want to be on Instagram. They don't want to be on Twitter. None of that stuff because they like understand how bad for your psyche it is. And like I wish I didn't have to be on those things because it would probably make me a much happier person. But yay, we have to we have to be I have to be on those things for work. But yeah, I mean our kids are like facing so many different things that we didn't have to face that people complain about millennials and I'm just like, yeah, man, it's a whole different set of rules out there.
Yeah, it's like, remember the dumb shit that you and I did when we were 15? We're the
Mm-hmm.
only ones who remember that because it's
Yeah.
not out in the world. It was just dumb shit we did.
Yeah.
And we learned from it. And no one took a video of it and put it out in the world. It was
Yeah.
just dumb shit because kids do dumb shit and you learn from it. But like, I think it is hard. I think the FOMO thing, is really real. And I think it's just hard. But you also like, kudos to your kids for just making the choice.
Yeah.
Because it's not, it's hard as a parent. I don't think you can just say, no, you can't be on there either.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
Well, and I think for me, what I've had to also realize is like social media isn't the world. Like one person will make a comment and everyone will go, oh my gosh, look at this comment. And you're like, that's one person who has 23 followers. And is it really worth my mental and emotional energy to like argue with this person? I mean, it's kind of like the situation I just brought up. Is it really worth my time to get angry about these things? And I think probably in the last 5 or 6 years, I've had, yay therapy, but I've really have just kind of had to learn let things go.
Yeah.
Like no one wins arguments online. You're not changing people's philosophies on things online. Um, I've adopted, I call it the vegetarian argument, where I am vegetarian. I'm also a large dude. And so like I do not look like the typical vegetarian. And people will want to come up and like they'll find out I'm vegetarian or that I don't drink or whatever, and they'll want to come up and like argue with me about it. And in my brain I have to go, do they actually want to know about how to do powerlifting while you're vegetarian, or do they just want to like talk to you about how you're wrong? And if people are actually interested, I will talk to them about it. But if they just want to argue, I'm like, man, I don't have time for this. Like, I don't, it's just, I'm not going to change your mind. You're not going to change my mind. Can we just move on with life? And I'm amazed, like, it's not like this happens often, but like, it happens often enough where I'm just like, what are you getting out of just arguing with me about something that has nothing to do with you? So,
No, I get it. I had a moment, with this podcast, and I got like, I don't have like a lot of online reviews on like the streaming platforms. Whatever is what it is. But like after like my second episode, somebody just put this really low review
hmm,
on Apple Podcasts, and was like, well, he talks about politics. I don't like it. I'm like, okay, so just don't listen. Like, why do you
yeah,
got to give it 1 star? Like,
yeah,
there's a period I had a music column in the Gannett paper in Ithaca. And, mostly I was sort of doing interviews of bands before concerts, but I would do some music reviews. But I'd only like put the reviews out there of stuff that I liked. Like, I wanted to share the things I liked and not like, why do I want to tell people something's bad?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I want to tell them like, hey, I really love this album and this is why. I don't like, now I'm old and I think I like read reviews. I'm like, ugh, like they're just so like self-serving now. I just can't even deal with them. But it's that sort of similar thing. People just like they want to be heard and they don't have a voice in another way. So they're just like screaming, or it's that notion of, when people only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think, there's a lot of that in our country right now, that people are disenfranchised and they don't see a way forward. And they really do feel like all they have is a hammer and they just are pounding on stuff. And it's not moving us forward at all.
well, well, and with that, I think there's so much comparison, and there's so much like, well, why am I not famous, right? And I mean, I always talk about my to my kids about this, where I'm like, like there's the 1%, right? And like they make X amount of money. And from what I remember, like the 1% is only $400,000 a year is the 1%. And I remember just being like, $400,000. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to make $400,000 a year, but that's not as much money as you think. Okay, most people live on, I think it's like 56,000, 60,000. You know, like that is what most people make. And so like the 1% is truly the 1%. Like that's not as many people as you think. And so I feel like there's this, everybody wants to be famous, everybody wants to be rich, everybody wants to be meaningful, everybody wants to have an impact. And I joked before about like, yeah, I'm a famous designer, but like, I mean, being a famous designer is like being a famous plumber. Like maybe 15 people actually would consider me of note. Um, but like for me, like I put out a book, collecting 20 years of poster design, and I've gotten yelled at by Lou Reed. Like that was awesome, getting
I
yelled
got
at
yelled
by.
at by George Carlin.
I feel, is that just how he greets you though? I feel like
He was
George Carlin.
it was when I worked at the theater and he was pissed because he didn't have the football game in the shitty dressing room. But
Oh
anyway,
well.
there could be a whole episode on famous people who've yelled at you. Though I did come up with a metric for my 12-year-old, which
Ooh,
was, do you have Wegmans in Maryland?
yes.
So Wegmans grocery store, it's our big grocery store here. my metric was a person is famous if the majority of people in the Wegmans they walk into would know who they are.
And that's tough.
So
That's
who is
tough.
that? It's not
I mean,
Jeff
that
Tweedy from Wilco.
no,
Awesome
no,
band. I mean, it's certainly Miss Swift,
yeah.
right? But like, I bet most, I mean, we're going to use this as like a little road to get to like the band poster stuff, which I want to talk about. It's no one in bands I like Gaslight Anthem or Frank Turner. Like, none of those people in the grocery store people aren't going to know who they are, and they're awesome.
I literally was outside the 930 Club, and Frank Turner was out there playing his guitar for like a video or something. And four 20 somethings walked by and were like, "Who's that fucking asshole?" And like just kept on walking. And I was like, "He's headlining tonight. It's a sold out show." You know, and like, yeah, that's being famous these days. Like,
Yeah.
like I remember hanging out with like members of Gaslight Anthem at a table, and people would come up to Brian and be like, "Hey, could you sign this?" But they wouldn't ask Ian or Benny or anybody else to sign it because they didn't know who they were. So like, yeah, but then again, like I've had people, this freaked me out. I went to go see Jeff Rosenstock play and at the 930 Club, and they have a balcony. And Jeff ran all the way around, came up the balcony, and stood next to me and played the saxophone. And apparently, I was in a bunch of videos of people took of him playing. And I had people text me or DM me about it. And that freaked me out.
Right. Because how did they figure out who you were?
Yeah. And
Because you
like
can
you
do
can
an
see me
image
now,
search
like,
on Google.
yeah, I mean, like, you and I looking at each other, you're the after picture, like you're the much, better looking version of me. Like I am not that distinctive. I'm trying to give you a compliment while also putting myself down. So I didn't want you to think I was putting you down, saying you're non-distinctive. I'm a white dude with hair and glasses and a
Yep.
crappy beard.
As am I.
But yeah, you're
And
the
we're
better
both
version.
kind of old.
But like, yeah, like it like weirded me out that I was getting people reaching out to me being like, "Hey, how was the show?" And I'm like, "Who the fuck are you?"
Right.
So yeah, that stuff, like fame and like putting my face out there, like terrifies me. I try not even to do it on my social media because it's just I don't want to deal with it. Because like somebody will, like, I put some picture up a couple of weeks ago, and people are like, "Yeah, your fly's down in the picture," and I'm like, "How did you notice that?" And also, shit, I can't believe my fly was down. So
There you go. Wynton Marsalis said the last thing he did before he got on stage was make sure his fly was zipped.
yeah,
Probably like a good life lesson right there. You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
to sort of, wrap up a little bit, you have done posters in this book, with some of my most like favorite bands. How did you kind of like get into doing the band posters, and what was the sort of arc? I imagine like once you get in and you do more, or you do more because you've done more kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I consider myself a designer. And I started taking classes, like screen printing classes in New York. And the teacher was like, Yeah, just print stuff. Like just come in here and print. And that's how you figure out how to do screen printing. And my one of my favorite bands, Firewater, was playing, and the opener was one of my favorite singers from one of my favorite bands, Scott McCloud from Girls Against Boys. And I just reached out and was like, "Can I do a poster for you guys?" And they were like, "Yeah, sure." And like they didn't know who I was, like at all. And I ended up doing a poster, and they liked it, and I got into the show for free, and I got to hang out with them, and it kind of just from there just continued. I moved back to DC, and like Pretty Girls Make Graves was playing. I reached out to them, and it just kept on going. At this point in my career, 20 freaking years later, um, I think I've done over 400 concert posters. I've done with that like another 300 like gallery pieces, or things for like pop art or movie posters and stuff like that. I luckily at this point, I almost I do this work as like my creative outlet. Like I do it because I want to do it, not because I have to do it, and it makes me happy. Like I'm doing work right now for the B-52s, and the poster I did before that was for Pennywise. And then the poster I did before that was for Spiritual Cramp and Peter Hook. And it's like, I at a minimum like, at a maximum, like with Peter Hook, fucking love Peter Hook, Joy Division and New Order. Like I love the B-52s, and it's just like I get to come up with weird ideas and do them, and then get paid for it. And I don't know, some people like them, some people don't, but some people like them. And it's just, like my dad is at that point in his life where he just goes, I have no clue what you do for a living, but you seem to like be making a living doing it, and you seem to be successful. And I'm just like, yeah, okay.
That's
You
like the
know?
most dad thing of the dads of our generation who like worked in one place for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
That's like the most like dad in their 80s thing right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my dad literally came and saw Rancid with me because he was in town for one night, and I did posters for Rancid, and Rancid wanted me to sell the posters at the show. So like my dad like hung out and like saw people coming up and like gushing over my work, and like all night long he was like, you know well, like giving me advice on how I could do it all better. Like you should really put out a tip jar, or maybe what you want to do is you can hold the posters for people until the end of the night. And I'm like, no, because then somebody gets drunk, and then I'm waiting around to give them the post.
Yeah.
But like, I don't think my dad understood it that night, but like he saw how happy it made some people to have like this poster that they rolled up, and then like went into the pit and started hitting people with the poster. um but like he knew it made people happy, and he knew that I liked it, and he knew I had a wad of cash at the end. So he was just like, yeah, I don't get it, but hey, good job.
Yeah. One more thing, and then we'll kind of wrap up. Is Pennywise reminded me, have you ever seen the movie The Other F Word?
Yes.
Love it.
Great movie. I mean, there's a line that Lars says, Fredrickson from Rancid, where um he's like, yeah, like you have this kid, And you never think about the repercussions of tattooing your forehead, but your kid still loves you for it. You know, he said it
Yeah, and
much
then he
cooler
talks
than I
about
did.
like wearing bondage pants to the playground or something, and you've got the
Yeah.
playground to yourself, especially when you show up with like the movie camera, or like I don't know. There's the interview with Flea is like really deep in that movie. I just really
Yeah.
recommend that movie to people. But to wrap up, like thank you so much. I super appreciate it. How can people sort of see your stuff, get your book? Self promotion time.
Oh, sure. Well, first off, thank you for having me. I hope, earlier you were talking about the person who gave you like the review. I hope that that you reached out to me and then I listened to all your podcasts and I thought they were fantastic. And I feel like in this world, if you can put some goodness out there, if somebody decides to spend an hour listening to you talk with somebody, like that is a success. You know, I mean, I to this day, when someone goes to rockets r red.com or letitbleed.com, and buys a book or buys a poster, like I am always amazed when that happens, that somebody decided to spend money on something I created. And hopefully, that like if somebody spends time with something that you did, like that is like the ultimate compliment. So hopefully you keep doing what you're doing, even though you're going to lose a whole ton of listeners dealing with me.
I
But
think the
yeah,
people who are in it get it. And I did. It was so funny over the summer at a soccer game, and I still haven't quite figured out how the woman put it together. Is like maybe I had a sober dad crew hat on or something at one game, but she came up and she was like, "My husband listens to your podcast, and it's really helped him." And I was like,
nice.
"All right, cool, like that." Because mostly it's just out there in the world, like
Yeah,
virtually. I don't have, you know, I don't intersect with a lot of people who listen. I mean, some people, family or whatever, and friends or colleagues, but for the most part, I don't intersect with the listeners,
yeah.
which is fine.
But like you put something out there, and I don't know if you're going to get rich doing this, but like sometimes just the fact that you're doing it, that's the win. You know,
Yeah.
like my favorite posters are usually the ones that don't sell, but I still consider just the fact that I made it and put it out there. That to me is like my victory for the week.
Yeah. I'm, for the record, 100% not getting rich doing this. I presented at the 12-year-olds who are sixth grade about podcasting, and one kid's like, you must like make a lot of money doing that. I'm like, I lose money. Like this is an out of pocket venture for me. Like I am not making money. Most of the merch I've sold is like me buying a onesie for one of the guests who's having a kid or something. Like you can't support yourself by buying your own merch.
Well, like, yeah, I mean, I did one of those, like, go in and explain to your child's classmates, what you do for a living. And I totally thought, like, we're going to go in and talk about the Aquabats and we're all going to make a poster together. And the woman who came in, who is a time management specialist, was more popular than me when it came to like my own kids. My own kids were like, yeah, I learned a lot about time management, Dad. She manages time. What do you do? And
My
it's just
kids
like,
do wonder what I do. They'll come to work. They're like, you sit at your computer and then you go and talk to people and then you sit at your computer. Like, what do you do? Like, because
yeah,
it's kind of esoteric. Like, they
yeah.
don't see it. But Um,
We
yeah,
went to WrestleMania this year, and I got my kid into a couple events because of wrestlers I worked with and knew. And then my kid was like, ah, all right. I don't, again, like, I just see dad drawing funny pictures, but it pays off
because I go to
because,
WrestleMania.
yeah, I get to meet people in spandex who are sweaty.
I mean, that's some people dream about that shit, but
Hey, hey, God bless. Um, but yeah, you can see my work on Instagram. It's Rockets are red. Everything's spelled out. You can Google Rockets, or I don't know. You can find me. Find me on Instagram, and then you can bounce around from there.
and I'll put the links in the show notes
Thank
and
you.
all that good stuff. And
Yeah.
I appreciate you being on. I appreciate your kind words. This was great.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. Sober Dad Crew is a DIY project by Stephen Kimball, who writes, edits, and produces the show. To support the show, please review it where you listen to podcasts or visit soberdadcrew.com to buy some merchandise or make a donation.